I just want to make some comments about the vexed question of diversity, as in this is a word that's bandied about constantly by the left, and the immediate reaction of most people to a word like this is that it's all very positive and wonderful and inclusive. That's what it's supposed to be. Difference is, the key to life, isn't it? We want variety and all that. And this is incorporated into the political language of the left. And the point is that there's a bit of a problematical character to this concept of diversity, in that, of course, this principle promoted by the left never includes conservatives. It never includes conservatives. They're not the least bit interested in a diversity of opinions and all the rest of it, and diversity of people who stand up against their leftist dogmas. To them, leftism is an absolute, even though they don't believe in absolutes, but that's another subject. Conservatives are constantly asking the question, why doesn't your sort of belief in diversity, which is to you a bit like the law of gravity, why does it never extend to conservatives or conservative opinions? And the immediate effect this creates is that, you're being so hypocritical. And of course I reject a lot of this commonplace terminology when you approach these ideological issues. For example, hypocrisy suggests volition and all that, and I combat by the principle of, they're just acting according to imperatives, they've really got no choice. It's kind of like a deterministic view of things, that they've got to act in this way. And I've never heard leftists really articulate this, but I always just take it that what they mean is that freedom of speech and diversity applies to everybody, except people who have a philosophical view of the world that dares to limit or constrain other people in some way. For example, Bible-believing Christians, or people with traditional moral values who say, tut, you shouldn't do that. And leftists run rampant in modern Western culture with their belief in total freedom of the individual in every way. And because they so dominate our culture, unfettered, and there's no real meaningful resistance to what these people are doing and saying, they can run a line that is entirely in keeping with their philosophy of life. That is, that I can sort of think, do and say anything I please, even if it sounds hopelessly hypocritical and contradictory, which is a really nice place to be. And of course, as with all the other motherhood statements of the left, it doesn't bear critical analysis. The only thing we're talking about, as I've said so many times in the past, is that the only thing sacred in Western culture since the end of the war is the principle of self-expression. It is just, over the decades, it is just the progress of the left, understanding as time goes by that they can get away with anything because there is no immunity to all this stuff, and they don't get any resistance. And as time goes by, they realise that they can get away with stuff that they didn't think they could get away with in the past. And so they just keep pushing and pushing the principle of what I would call moral anarchy. And when you get a society that falls into moral anarchy, social anarchy is probably not far behind. So this is just a few thoughts on diversity that puts it in perspective and explains how these people can be so amazingly hypocritical, and yet that doesn't inhibit them or constrain them, because they don't believe in constraint, any constraint. A practical example would be no green left politician is going to dare to say to some asylum seekers coming ashore in Australia, thus far you shall go and no further. they're not going to say no. They're not going to say no to anything. That is what it all comes down to. Freedom of expression, and whether a society will tolerate just complete freedom of expression, which will ultimately do away with any concept whatsoever of constraint or restraint in human behaviour. And the reason why Israel Folau, for example, is not included in the sweeping statement of the Rugby Australia Association that we are an inclusive organisation and we include everybody except Bible-believing Christians. They're not included because they have constraint, limitations on human behaviour built into their belief system. So this principle doesn't apply to them. They're outside the fold. Might sound hypocritical, which it is, but that's the sense of this in the twisted minds of leftists. That's all for now.